this corner, this one lower. We're walking on Goldhammer to a lower.
Yeah.
This corner now.
Okay.
We just passed. That was my granduncle's house. We're at this corner.
Before the war, in Tarnow lived about 25,000 of Jews. It was a very big center. 45% of total population, they were Jews in Tarnow. It was a big center of Hasidim, Zionism, and industry in east side of Tarnow. Follow one big street, Delvoska, Lemberg Street, lived about 11,000 of Jews, mostly Hasidim, and Zionists and modern Jews and assimilated Jews lived in center of city, rich people on main streets. This synagogue, the old synagogue, was the center of Jewish life until the Second World War. The Jewish street, Żydowska Street until now, it was formed in 14th century. The first name of Jews from Tarnow was noted in documents in 1445. And before the war in Tarnow we had 6 synagogues, 6 independent synagogues, and over 70 shtibuls where Germans came to Tarnow. They burned every synagogue, and after this it was destroyed step by step, but the Bima survived.
You personally, you've shown a lot of leadership to keep alive the memory of the Jews of Tarnow. Why does that matter to you?
I work in museum all my life, so when I started to work in museum, I found many documents connected to Jewish, according to Jewish life, Jewish history. It was for me very interesting. Anyway, I was not born in Tarnow, so I didn't know the history of Jews in Tarnow for my parents, because I moved to Tarnow when I was 14. So I didn't met Jews before. For me it was very exotic. I study archaeology, ethnology, anthropology, and my dream was to investigate Indians, Africa, very exotic culture. And when I find the documents connected to Jewish life, it was for me like exotic, something very exotic. My daughter was so interested that she converted, and now we have in Tarnow, if she come to Tarnow, one original Jew converted to Judaism. In this moment in Warsaw, and some years in Brooklyn and some years in Israel, and sometimes in Tarnow. And now she's guiding Israeli group in Warsaw, in all over the Poland, in Hebrew.
From having 25,000 Jews to having no Jews, there had to have been changes in the city.
I don't remember this time. And when I started to interest it was so late to investigate the people. It was after the war. The people forget it. I studied the newspapers. I did it just after the war. It's not one sentence on Jews. It was half of Tarnow were Jews, and they were annihilated. I remember the people say, Żydowska Street, this is ghetto. I didn't understand, why ghetto? It's the biggest complex of mass graves on the Polish territory. 6, 7, maybe 8,000 of Jews were killed. not only Jews, because it was a special place for the Germans for the killing the Polish people too. In the ghetto, there lived 20,000 of Jews, and step by step, next month, they organized the next liquidation action, and finally in February 1943, the Tarnow was free of Jews. Buildings are original because it was the one side of the street, the main street, and if you see, these buildings were built after the war, except some buildings like this, because it was the Jewish public bath with mikveh. It's a very nice building, and what's important, because in June 1940, Germans collect in this building in bath over 700 Polish prisoners from local prison. And after disinfection, next day, the June 14, they were sent to the station and sent to Auschwitz. So this memory monument, and among them were 12 Jews, Tarnowian Jews, but they were captured by Germans not as a Jews, but Polish intelligentsia, because Jews were sent to the Auschwitz 2 years later.
Next to the new synagogue.
Let me see.
The house is here. Here's Ulika Wazova. Here's the new synagogue. Here's the new synagogue, and there's the house, son.
Oh,
down there.
Doesn't exist. Apteka.
Where I just showed you on the map here. Right next to the new synagogue, a block away. Here we just came from here, from the old synagogue. We crossed Eula Wazova. This is also right near there.
Oh yes, but it's a new building.
Okay.
Yes. The next building.
Okay.
Can we go?
All right. Nish is nish.
No. We're not going to give up. We're going to comb every street in Tarnow.
Should be the next corner then, right?
Threw out that whole thing and you're ready to go niche to niche.
Tu ma być gdzieś koło Mekwy. Pod dębem.
O rany boskie, co pan to? Gdzie to nie tu?
So this is the end of the park. Across the
Yes.
street from the corner says should be this building.
Yeah.
This is new?
Yes, it didn't exist.
I see.
It was closed street.
But the park was here, right? The plaque was here.
Plac, it means
Plaza.
place.
Oh, plaza. Okay.
Place.
So it's right
Place.
across from the end of the plaza. So it's right this place. All right, fine.
Thumbs up. I think Tarnow was established in the 1300s and Jews came in the 1400s. So Jews were living here almost 500 years. Something for us to remember, 500 years. But I want to also stop here because of this statue over here, which is Pope John Paul II. And I'm stopping here to say something about John Paul II for two reasons. First of all, because it's impossible to visit Poland without saying a few words about the Polish Pope. He played such an important role here. Every Polish city today has a street named after Pope John Paul II. He was not only the first Polish Pope, he was the champion of the Polish people against communism. And the Solidarity movement, which overthrew communism here in Poland, was actually the key to the fall of the Soviet Empire. he played a critical role. He's a national hero. That's the first reason I want to mention him. But there's a second reason to mention him, because Pope John Paul II had a very special relationship with the Jewish people. He went to school in the interwar years with Jews. And so when he came to Israel to visit in the year 2000, he met his former classmates from his town. And I don't know whether you saw it, but I saw it on Israeli TV, right? These people who were 6, 7, 8, 12 years old when they were with him in class and played soccer with him, you know, and now he's the Pope. And he agreed, of course, to meet with them. And they came out of the meeting, and the Israeli TV interviewer was asking what was it like. He said it was very nice. We haven't seen him in so long. He was very polite. He was very warm. And then they asked him, well, what was he like as a child? And they said, he was the smartest kid in the class. Which so goes against our stereotypes. Yes. Because we would have assumed the Jewish kid was the smartest kid in the class. They said he was the smartest kid in the class. But more importantly than that, I want to tell you a story about Pope John Paul II. In 1942, a Jewish couple in the Krakow ghetto entrusted their son to a childless Polish Catholic couple in order to save him from the Germans. When the war was over, the boy's adoptive parents brought him to a young priest to be baptized. When the young priest learned that the orphan's parents had asked that he be returned to the Jewish people, the priest refused to baptize the boy. If you know anything about the history of the church, for a priest to refuse to baptize a child is something very unusual. That priest, then known as Karol Wojtyła, became Pope John Paul II. We remember him as one who forever remained a friend of the Jewish people. When he came to Israel, he came to the Kotel. He put a kvittel in the Kotel. And this is what the kvittel said. God of our fathers, you chose Abraham and his descendants to bring your name to the nations. We are deeply saddened by the behavior of those who in the course of history have caused these children of yours to suffer. And asking your forgiveness, we wish to commit ourselves to genuine brotherhood with the people of the covenant.
Oh, wow.
Pope John Paul II said explicitly that anti-Semitism is a sin against the church. He was basing himself on Pope John the 23rd from the 1960s, but no pope had ever said something so explicitly. It had a tremendous influence on Poland because this national hero, the most important religious leader in Poland, the Pope, has now said anti-Semitism is a sin against the church. I don't mean to say that by his statement he eliminated anti-Semitism in Poland, but for many people it was a turning point in the way that they viewed the Jewish people because of him. I told you the story about this childless couple and this boy. I told this story a couple of years ago to a group from the Young Israel of Scarsdale. And they said, oh yeah, we know him. It's Stan Berger. Stan Berger, and I wrote it down, who took the name of the cousins who raised him in Montreal and later lived in Stamford, Connecticut. That is the boy that Pope John Paul II, as a young priest, refused to baptize, and he grew up in a religious home in Montreal and was a religious Jew for the rest of his life. Of those 40,000 Jews who were in the Tarnow ghetto, beginning in the summer of 1942, June 1942, as you read on the plaque, blood ran through the streets of Tarnow. It's a very powerful line. Not just Jews were murdered, blood ran through the streets of Tarnow were the words he chose on that plaque. In the marketplace, where Jews were tortured and shot, about half of the Tarnow Jews were sent to Belzhitz. We are in Galicia, and Belzhitz is the Reinhard camp where most Galician Jews were sent to their death. A camp that was very similar to Treblinka that we visited in terms of how it operated. And there were Jews who were killed in the Jewish cemetery of Tarnow, a cemetery that goes back centuries. And then there's this place, Spilatovska Gora, about 8 miles outside of the city of Tarnow. Today we would call it a suburb of Tarnow. You saw those houses that have been built in the last 30 years or so since the fall of communism. But in those days, in the 1940s, this was a forest. In fact, if you want to, you can take a beautiful forest walk down here. It's all forest. The beautiful trails. And this was the place where the Nazis decided would be the killing spot for about 8,000 Jews from the Tarnow ghetto. Here's a communist era memorial. Again, the communists like to have very big monuments. And my Polish is not so great, but I can tell you one thing. The word Żydowski does not appear. It's the universalization of suffering that erases the fact that 80% of the people buried here are Jews. There are 6 mass graves here. The ones that are for Polish Catholics are marked in white, and I think that all of them have crosses. The ones that are Jewish mass graves are painted in blue. But I also want to point out on the right-hand side, the first Jewish mass grave is a grave for 800 Jewish children from Tarnow. One of the things that happened in that Rinnik, that beautiful Rinnik, which was a center of Jewish life and commerce, center of life and commerce of the city of Tarnow for centuries. One of the things that happened in that Rinnik is that at one point, when all of the Jews of the ghetto were forced to come to the Rinnik, was that children were torn away from the arms of their parents. That was certainly torture for both children and parents. Through Ligon, here lies 800 Cyclopta Kepelach, battered heads, von Yiddische Kinder, of Jewish children who were murdered here on June 11th, 1942, and it signed the Yiddish Komitee, the Jewish Committee in Tarnow, the Tarnow Jewish Committee. The survivors, most of whom survived by fleeing to the Soviet Union, came back to Tarnow, and they wanted to mark this place where 800 of their children were murdered, and Michael mentions that probably his father played with some of these children before they escaped in Tarnow. As I was growing up in a home where my parents were refugees who had survived the war, where my grandparents and my aunt were murdered by the Nazis, I grew up with a certain Holocaust consciousness. And as a teenager, when I would read Holocaust literature, I always imagined myself somehow in this situation. I imagined myself as a teenager. I imagined myself as a kid. And it was only in 1976, when the movie Voyage of the Damned came out, our eldest child had just been born. And watching that movie, and watching the separation scene that they show in Hamburg Harbor, where many of the German Jewish parents are saying goodbye to their children, that they're putting on this boat that they hope will take them to Cuba where they have visas. Watching that scene, for the first time in my life, I identified with the Shoah as a parent and not as a child. And it was very different. It was very different. Because we know that there are many different kinds of love in the world. There's the love of romance. There's the love of marriage. There's the love of siblings. There's the love of friends. Each one of them is unique. Each one of them is different. But I think that most of us know there is nothing like the love of a parent for a child. So here we remember these 800 Ziklapta Kepelach, as we remember the estimated 1 million Jewish children who were murdered by the Nazis. A whole generation. Who knows what they could have done? Who knows what they would have become? How many of them would have become Talmidei Chachamim and rabbis? How many of them would have become scientists, musicians, mothers and fathers themselves? An entire generation wiped out.
Dear Mirala, I can't believe I have one night to stuff a lifetime of love into this letter. Tomorrow morning, at 4 a.m. can be called morning, I'm giving you up. I am taking you, Mirala, to the back entrance of dear, brave Herman's grocery, and the child rescuers will be waiting there for you and the 32 other children under the age of 3. They'll inject you with a sedative so you won't cry, and then they'll slip off in the pre-dawn with you, my life, my love, out of this barbaric country to safety. We pushed it off, Mirala. We didn't want to believe we'd have to give up our child, probably never to see her again. But this is the last child's rescue. After this, there'll be none left to rescue, because tomorrow, our informers tell us, is the last big roundup. Tomorrow they come from men, women, and children. And I've been convinced by these words, spoken by our trusted informer Herman, the brave Gentile doctor. Any child they take away either dies immediately or dies on the way to the death camp. The word death 3 times in one sentence. We were the last ones to be convinced to give up our child. He said finally with the deepest sadness and every exhausted wrinkle in his face, I cannot force you, but if you keep her with you, she will be dead in a month. They have no use for babies. She cannot work for them. If you want to give her to us, bring her to the back entrance of my grocery at 4 a.m. No belongings, whatever food you have. Goodbye. Mirala, do you see why I have to give you up? He said no belongings, but I will beg, I will plead that this letter be allowed to go, sewn into your undershirt. And then I will pray to God that the letter stays with you until you are old enough to read it. You must know that we love you. You must know why you are alone without parents. not because they didn't love you, but because they did. It's eerie to think that by the time you read this, I'll probably be dead. That's what Herman says is going on. People either die immediately or on the way or after a week or two of forced labor and no food. But I won't have lived in vain, Mirala, if I know that I brought you into the world and you will live and survive and go big and strong and you'll be happy. You can be happy, Mirala, because we loved you. What makes a difference in the lives of adults, it seems, is if they had secure childhoods. Secure with lots of love and acceptance and needs fulfilled and predictable routine and the like. You've had that up to this minute. You'll have it up till 4 a.m., but then you won't. Who knows who will end up taking care of you? Some family who will take you in for the money Herman will pay them? They will surely be kinder to their own than to you. Here is where pain mixes with rage. I rage at the animals who are making it possible for you to cry, and I won't be there to comfort you. But you will have this letter, and this letter will make you feel secure, if God answers my prayers. You have us, Mirala, even though you don't see us. We are with you. We're watching you and praying for you. Every time you have troubles, we are pounding on the door to God's very throne room, insisting on an audience and demanding mercy for our Mirala, down on earth alone without her parents. And God will listen to us. We won't leave him alone until he agrees that you deserve health, love, and happiness. Mirala, you'll wonder what your first 2 years were like. You'll wish you could remember. Let me remember for you right now, tenderly, on this piece of paper. You like hot cereal in the morning with lots of milk and sugar. Except that there's no milk and sugar now, none in the whole city. But I make your cereal anyway, and you eat it with big smiles between every bite. Then you come ready for your nap, so I rock you after putting the rocker where the sunlight will fail on it. I rock you until you fall asleep, and then I put you in my bed. You sleep well there, you like my smell. What will you smell tomorrow night? Surely nobody will rock you tomorrow, not even in the shade. Oh God, I cannot do it, I will do it. For you, Mirala, you'll have at least a hope for life. Mirala, do me a favor. After you've grown, after this dirty, nightmarish war is over, I know there'll be those who underplay the tragedies going on here every day. They will say, a war is a war. It was just a war. Mirala, tell them about this agony. Tell them how you felt secure in my arms, rocking to sleep in the sunlight. Tell them how your father ran one night a year ago to get you medicine, past centuries while breaking their curfew. He risked his life to ease your pain, Mirala, and now the three of us are being torn apart. Just a war? Tell them, Mirala, that all wars in the world don't add up to the agony in my heart right now as I write this. God, it's 2 a.m. already. Only 2 more hours with my love, my baby, my life, my Mirala. I'm going to hold you now, Mirala, for 2 hours. Your father and I are going to wake you, feed you, and tell you over and over how much we love you. You're barely 2 years old, but maybe, if God is good, maybe you'll remember it and maybe you'll keep this letter until you're old enough to read it. There will be bad times for you, Mirala, I know. But just think about me holding you, rocking you to sleep in the sunlight. Keep that sunlight in your heart always. I love you. Your father loves you. May God help us all. Mama.
We come here in the forest. We hear that 8,000 are buried in mass graves here, 800 children in the spot in which we stand. And relative to other places we've been and will be tomorrow, 8,000, it's almost impossible to say this, is a negligible number. Treblinka, 900,000, Auschwitz, million. The number 8,000 seems small relative to some of the other places. Saul was commenting to me as we walked in, the attack on the World Trade Center killed 3,000 people. Devastating, horrific, unimaginable in America. $100 million memorial was built. The world is turned upside down. New York City all focuses on it. And it's a third of the tragedy of this one spot hidden in the forest, in this one location that we're in, to give it a sense of perspective. Being here is personal for me. We walked through Tarnow with Michael Michel and the privilege of hearing his father's story, his childhood there, who, thank God, was able to get out. Michael and Liz commented that perhaps we're standing at the mass grave of children who his father played with in his youth, who didn't have that fortune. But my father's father had family in Tarnow as well. My great-grandfather and my great-uncles, and to this day we don't know what happened to them. My father said that his father mentioned, a cousin had said their yurtzeit is in ER 1942, but the circumstances, the place of the death, we don't know. And what we learned and heard from Dr. Bernstein means that there's a great chance that they may be buried right here. Significant because it's my family. It's especially significant because it's my name. The Umschlagplatz in Warsaw, we saw the wall of names. We challenged you to find your name. My Hebrew name is Efrem Chaim. I'm named for those great uncles who we don't know where they're buried. I bear their name and the responsibility of being their monument, of being their matzeva. And being here therefore takes on an extra special level of meaning. When Moshe and the Jewish people leave Egypt, they take the bones of Yosef, fulfilling the promise. They won't leave him buried there in that place. A place that tortured the Jews, that oppressed the Jews, that persecuted the Jews. Yosef, anticipating, said, I don't want to be here. Make me a promise, you'll take me with you. And Moshe fulfills that promise, carrying the bones of Yosef himself through the Yam Suf, to be buried ultimately in Shechem, in Eretz Yisrael, in the land and the state of Israel. And the Pasuk tells us that Moshe carried Vayikach es atzmos Yosef imo. He took the bones of Yosef together with him. And the Iturei Torah says, read it, not atzmos Yosef. He didn't take the bones, he took the atzmus Yosef, the essence of Yosef. Who Yosef was, what he stood for. His ability to live in a foreign land and maintain his Torah true values. His capacity to be a link in the chain of a Masorah, transmit our sacred tradition. Yosef HaTzadik, who endured the great enticement of the wife of Potiphar. Moshe took not only the bones of Yosef, but the atzmus, the essence of Yosef with him. Because it was Yosef who would help mold and shape Moshe and the Jewish people when they got to the other side. We have a responsibility at mass graves like this, in all our stops here in this place, Poland, like Mitzrayim, that does not have a great legacy to our people. And to take atzmos, to take the bones of our ancestors, not literally and certainly not of those who don't have a resting place in a matzeva, but their atzmus, who they were and what they stood for, the values they lived by, the lifestyles they've led, and the great sacrifice they made. And many of the survivors, the sacrifice they made to give us the life that we have. Many of us here knew Rabbi Levine, Rav Shmuel Levine, from our community's mother, Mrs. Levine, Zechrona Levracha. She was an amazing woman of tremendous modesty, of great humility, of profound faith, of incredible courage. She was a throwback to another generation and another time. And when she visited Rabbi Levine in our community, you had contact with another world just by being in her presence, let alone talking to her. She was just a little girl when the Nazis rose to power, when they conquered Poland. And as she and her family were being rounded up for deportation, her father noticed that she was wearing earrings he had given to her. And quickly, in a hurried fashion, he said to her, take out those earrings. Because the Nazis, if they see them, are going to tear them from your ears. You won't have them anyway, and all you'll have is the incredible pain and wound of earrings being torn from your ears. They were already literally on the way out of the house. And with no idea of where else to put them, she took out the earrings and threw them under the steps of the front porch of her childhood home. Mrs. Levine survived the war. And after being liberated from the camp with no idea where to go, she returned back to that childhood home. We spoke about this earlier several times. She knocked on the door and she explained to the Polish stranger who answered, this was my home, we were deported and taken from it, these are my belongings, I've come back. And the hostile resident of the home screamed at her, slammed the door in her face, and told her to get lost. She sat down on the steps of the porch with her head in her hands, sobbing, not knowing what to do next, where to go, or how she could continue. And then it hit her. She suddenly remembered the earrings. She put her hand under the step behind her, felt around, and quickly found one of those earrings. She realized she wanted the other one desperately, and it took a lot longer. She tried to be quiet, not to attract the attention of the neighbors, of the person of the house. But after several minutes, she was able to find the second earring. Mrs. Levine wore those earrings the rest of her life. Almost always, whatever jewelry she had, it was those earrings that she wore almost every day the rest of her life, because that was the atzmus. Those earrings were the gift of her parents, were the message of her father, were her connection to her past. She took it with her. We, please God, will never be in the position of the woman whose letter Yocheved read, that had to pin it to the undershirt of a 2-year-old daughter with the hope she could one day read it. We have the privilege of writing and communicating and transmitting to our children, not under threat. For a long time, Jews didn't only take care of their estate planning in the form of how to avoid giving the most to Uncle Sam, how to give it out equitably, how to give it out halachically. But for a long time, Jews wrote a tzavah. They wrote an ethical will. My dear children, these are the values I lived by. This is what I want you to know. These are my hopes and my dreams for you. This is what I want you to take from my life. When I meet a family planning their loved one's funeral, every time I ask that question at the end, they tell me their whole history, and then I say, if your parent were here right now and I can ask them, what do they hope you took from their life? How do they want to be remembered? What values do they wish you emulate? What would they say? Sometimes families answer right away, glowingly, it's clear as day, and other times they sit and say, I've never really thought about that. What a crime, what a shame to not leave a clear communication. So our homework to you right now is to take your journal. Two of the pages in the back you'll see says, letter to children and grandchildren. To find a step, to find a place to sit, to take a few moments and to write that letter. A letter you may choose to deliver to them now, you may put away someday for them to read later, or maybe you don't ever share, but it helps you communicate and coordinate your thoughts. But what has this trip inspired in us? What does Judaism mean to us? What are the values that we live by? What do we care about? What are the dreams and aspirations we have for our children? What matters most to us in their lives? Our children and grandchildren. When they look back and take our atzmos, when they take our bones after our final resting place, what will be our atzmus? What is the essence in us we want them to know and we want them to emulate? In this place, standing around this mass grave of 800 children who didn't get to grow up and fulfill the dreams of their parents, let us who are so privileged not miss the opportunity to communicate what matters to us. Not just to give earrings they can wear the rest of their life, but to give values they can aspire to.
Hashem